Brooke was a beautiful young girl who grew up in a happy and loving family. One day, her father gave her an unusual gift, a small baby crow. Raising it taught Brooke responsibility. Unfortunately, one day the girl passed away for unknown reasons. During her funeral, the crow landed on the coffin, and that's when something incredible happened. Brooke was only 6 years old, but she was strong, beautiful, and independent. She loved spending time in the garden, observing plants and insects. She ran, jumped, and played among the trees, scraped her knees, and generally had a wonderful childhood. Living in a small village in the UK, life was slow and quiet. Brooke's mother stayed home to take care of the house and her child, while her father was a sailor who often spent weeks, sometimes even months, at sea. Brooke missed him greatly and was always happy when her father returned. She not only spent time with her father but also loved the strange and wonderful gifts he brought her. Over the past few years, he had brought her seashells from a Caribbean beach, exotic sculptures from some Middle Eastern country, as well as books and toys from all over Europe and America. Brooke eagerly stood at the gate, waiting for her father to come down the street. This time he had been gone for 2 months and was expected to return home at any moment. Suddenly, she saw her father slowly walking down the street. Brooke squealed with joy and ran to him, throwing herself into his arms. She hugged him tightly and kissed him on the cheek. But she noticed something. There was no gift. Usually, her dad would immediately hand her something wrapped in gift paper, but not this time. That's when he knelt down and placed something in her hand. She jumped slightly, feeling something move in her palm, looked down, and saw a tiny baby crow. Her father told her it was a little raven. He asked her to protect and take care of it like a real human child. Brooke was startled, but her face lit up when she realized the great responsibility that lay on her shoulders. Over the next few weeks, Brooke spent all her time with the raven. She fed it, gave it water, and even taught it a few tricks. Ravens are very intelligent birds, and her pet quickly understood what the little girl was trying to teach it. The baby bird also began to grow and learned to fly within a few weeks. Brooke would take it outside and watch in adoration as it soared in the sky. It could easily fly away and never return, but it always found its way back to its owner. It was clear that there was a strong bond between the girl and the bird. But one day, tragedy struck. While in the garden, lying under a large tree, Brooke suddenly stopped breathing and grabbed her throat. The raven began to scream loudly, and within a few minutes, Brooke's parents came to the window to see what was going on. Seeing their daughter lying on the ground, they rushed outside and grabbed her. Ignoring the raven, they shoved the girl into the car and drove her to the nearest hospital. The raven sat in the tree and watched as their car drove away. Upon arriving at the hospital, the doctors quickly began to check Brooke's lungs. A young and healthy girl shouldn't have any breathing problems, so it was important for them to scan her lungs to ensure there were no issues. Time was of the essence, as a lack of oxygen could cause serious and irreversible damage. All this time, her parents watched the proceedings with tears in their eyes. Despite all the doctor's efforts, unfortunately, Brooke was declared dead. Meanwhile, the raven sat outside the hospital room window and continued to peck, but the staff decided to chase it away. There was no place for such a bird in the hospital. It couldn't be let in, even if it was a pet. As Brooke's parents drove home, the raven pecked at their car, making a lot of noise again. The grieving people ignored it. As soon as they returned home and began preparing for the funeral, the raven continued trying to get their attention. But they had no time for that. Soon the day of Brooke's funeral arrived. Her parents, relatives, and friends mourned the little girl, who lay motionless in her small coffin. The lid was open so that people could say their goodbyes. In the coffin, she looked so fragile and innocent, as if she were some precious porcelain doll. Many people cried as they passed by Brooke, stroking her face and kissing her cheek. The raven sat in a nearby tree, watching what was happening. From time to time, it would fly down and circle above the gathered crowd, making loud sounds. Brooke's parents held their breath as the raven finally descended and landed on the coffin, curiously looking at its owner's body. Suddenly, the bird began to make a strange buzzing sound, as if asking a question. It hopped back and forth from the lid to the edge of the coffin and then back again. After a few minutes, the bird began to peck at Brooke's body, as if trying to wake her up. Brooke's parents were touched to see such a sight, and although they understood that the raven must have sensed its form of grief, they knew it couldn't stay there pecking at the girl. They tried to shout at it, but it didn't move and even began to peck at her mouth. Such behavior seemed shameful for the family but concealed a secret motive that everyone was about to discover. Approaching the open coffin, the father waved his hands to scare the bird away. The raven flapped its wings and screamed, but reluctantly flew up and went to the nearest tree, staring down intently. Everyone watched the raven as it made its short flight, but when everyone focused on the coffin, they froze. Brooke was sitting up. An apple the size of a walnut lay on her lap. It had gotten stuck in her throat after falling from the tree under which the girl had been lying in the garden. When she was rushed to the hospital, the doctors assumed the problem was with her lungs, so they only checked her with a chest X-ray, which showed nothing. They didn't think to check her throat. The lack of oxygen sent her into a coma, and she was mistakenly declared dead, despite still being able to take slow, shallow breaths. Brooke looked at her mother and father, who rushed to her, hugging and kissing her. Their daughter was alive. Shocked, they realized that the raven had known all along. It had tried many times to convey this message to Brooke's parents, but they hadn't understood, and the bird pecking at Brooke's face and mouth was its way of clearing the blockage. Fortunately, the bird had enough time to save Brooke's life. Dear viewers, how would you react if you found yourself at Brooke's funeral and witnessed what was happening?